I might get 3 or 4 serial killer calls a day at my house.
Still?
Yes. They can actually call me almost any time they want from their cell.
And you hang up. So today we've got Anthony Meoli, accomplished criminologist, therapist, attorney, author, serial killer expert with upwards of 25 years of experience, and collector extraordinaire with us on Wheels and Wealth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You've brought an incredible specimen of a vehicle today. We've had amazing cars on the show thus far, but I got to tell you, this is extraordinary, absolutely incredible. So on Wheels and Wealth, we really like to not just focus on the car. We've done that. You know, we've got our takes and we've seen what it looks like outside. We've examined the car, but now it's time to dig into how we actually get something like this. On Wheels and Wealth, the real draw of our show is to educate our viewers and really leverage the wealth of experience, knowledge, and expertise of our guests to teach us how we can actually be in a position at some point to play at this level. Yeah, I mean, take it away. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I believe your primary business for years has been criminology.
Yes.
And according to Google, by the way, the average criminologist makes somewhere between $26,000 and $100K. So clearly you're doing something right, because I highly doubt the average criminologist is going to be driving a McLaren Senna.
That might be true, but the average criminologist is probably not investing in all of the things that I've been investing in for years, along with my wife. And combined together, those years of investing together have helped us build the wealth necessary to have what you see before you, among other things. Awesome.
So it's fair to say criminology is not what got you to this point.
I would say education always plays a part, not only, you know, as far as academia, but I think education in the items that you're going to study play a crucial point in what you need to do in order to build wealth. So I do think those are particular aspects.
This is a 2019 McLaren Senna. 500 were produced. This is number 320 of the 500 that were allotted. It is finished in kilo gray with carbon fiber throughout the body, and the entire car is finished in carbon fiber. So that's the essence of the basics.
So this is just painted carbon fiber?
It's painted carbon fiber, yes.
What am I looking at? Like, I mean, this is...
So you're looking at 789 horsepower staring at you. So you got twin turbos that are forcing this power back at you. You have 590 pound-feet of torque, which is what generates that quickness to you. The acceleration comes from the horsepower, but that's what makes the car fast. The torque is what makes the car quick. So what's important to understand, to give an idea of the torque in this car, the 590 pound-feet of torque is akin to a Ford F-150 that only has about 570 pound-feet of torque. So 2023, the highest output F-150 generates about 570 pound-feet of torque. So this car has as much pulling power, essentially, as an F-150.
That is ridiculous. Speaking about studying, you have been in the minds of, would it be fair to say, upwards of 60 serial killers, murderers, and arsonists?
I would say it's more like over 150.
Wow, okay. What's that like?
Well, I've been doing it so long that it seems like nothing to me. Like, I might get 3 or 4 serial killer calls a day at my house.
Still?
Yes. So it's not unusual for me to get phone calls from serial killers. I actually hang up on them. Most people would be like, oh my God, like, there's a serial killer calling, you know, what do I do?
But they're actually calling from prison.
They're calling from prison. Now, you have to remember, I've been doing this so long that it used to be the kind where they would actually get, you know, called out of their cell, go down to the end, get on the old hardline phone. It's not like that anymore. Now they can actually call you from a tablet inside their prison cell, like an iPad. Now, granted, it's sort of a dirt cheap iPad. But nonetheless, the technology is there. So they can actually call me almost anytime they want from their cell.
And you hang up.
Well, it's that I get calls so often, I don't interrupt my life anymore for them, where I used to make it a point to do that, that now I've gotten to a point that, I don't want to say I've done enough, but I've spoken to these individuals for so long that the need to get the information is largely waned, but I will often pick up the phone to keep that contact going, the relationship going. It's just that often that person will call me several times in a day or several times in a week, and sometimes it can get to the point where it does interfere with my life.
Has your wife ever answered the phone?
My wife answers the phone all the time, and she'll say, it's XYZ serial killer on the phone. We're not taking this call because it's dinner time or it's lunchtime, or I've had serial killers call during Thanksgiving and Christmas with my whole family present. I mean, that's what I do. So I've talked to some serial killers for the better part of 25 years.
What made you want to even get into that line of study?
When I was in high school, I found it interesting that a lot of the crimes I had heard about were never really explored. And then when I got into college, oddly enough, I had two females who I had known throughout the years who were met with an end that I did not anticipate, let's put it that way. It was those two acts, I think, that actually solidified. One female had been murdered, another had been shot, and one was actually in my high school class who I knew rather well, and she had been shot in Florida multiple times, and it was a shock to me that this was somebody who I knew. And this was not an area that in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where this is something that was a routine thing. So for me, I was at Penn State University at the time studying business actuarial science.
Get out of here.
Yeah. So
I majored in actuarial science.
Did you?
I did.
So I was actually studying actuarial science, and I flipped the switch and said, you know what? I'm going to go back, study criminology, and I graduated with an administration of justice degree from Penn State.
And then?
Then I followed it up with a master's in forensic psychology, a master's in clinical psychology. I also have a law degree. So I just have a broad-based knowledge of how the law and mind work. But my first contact with, I would say, serial killers probably dates back to 1998-ish.
Okay.
So it's been a minute.
So clearly there are tons of criminologists and therapists who've got, you know, I would say probably an equal amount of education, experience. How do you get to a point where you are interviewing upwards of 150, serial killers, arsonists, what have you?
Well, to be clear, I mean, the interview process is more of me getting to know them personally. So just like you and I are conversing at the moment, I did it old school. So this was pen to paper, writing 2, 3, 4 pages by hand, slapping a stamp on it and throwing it in the mailbox. So I would get their responses back based on what I wrote. Not every criminologist was doing that. A lot of people have the academia, but that's where they stop. That's where I started. So that's what makes me a little bit different, is I wanted that personal connection with them so that I could build the trust, so I could learn more about how they got to where they are. I know the crimes, anybody can look that up, but it's difficult to get to learn the human being, and that's where I specialize.
So this was, or these have been projects that you've done on your own or funded for yourself for your own research, or were you commissioned by institutes or governments or anything like that to do those things?
That's a good question, but no, it was personally funded by me and the U.S. stamp. No, I mean, no one helped me. It was just my idea of, at the time I was recently married and my wife's like, who are you mailing all these letters to? I was writing 25 to 35 letters a week all over the country. So I was trying, I mean, it wasn't just one inmate, it was every inmate I could try to contact. And many of those long letters went unanswered, but some came back. And there was some excitement to actually getting a letter back saying, hey, you know, that was an interesting letter you wrote. If you want to write back, you know, here's my address. And so it began.
So McLaren Senna was designed essentially to commemorate its greatest driver ever, which was Ayrton Senna. He won 32 championships. He won 3 world titles.
Gotcha.
For McLaren, becoming their greatest race car driver ever. So when they contacted the family, they wanted to commemorate with a car that would sum up all of Ayrton's attributes into one. And the main thing for him was the ability to drive the car and become one with the car. And that's why they wanted to make a car that within modern precepts that has all the attributes of making you one with a car, which is why the car is constructed entirely of carbon fiber. And once you sit in the car, you feel like you're one with the car. So it's a very special piece of machine.
I got in a bit earlier, and you absolutely feel one with the car because this is one of the hardest cars to enter and exit that I've ever been in my life. So at what point then do you start transitioning, or have you ever really transitioned from doing that work to getting deep into collecting all sorts of things, as we'll find out about? You've been collecting for roughly about 20 years, correct? Things of all sorts, art, things. I mean, we'll get into that. Cars. How does one start making that transition to paying such close attention to detail in the collecting world? Because clearly, you know, you're busy as a criminologist and a therapist over the years. So how does that work?
You don't sleep. That's one aspect. Another aspect is I am a very detail-oriented person.
Okay.
So I always pay attention to the minutia, the finer details of things. And maybe some people might see that as something that comes across as curt, maybe short with them. But for my personality, I just like to get into the details of things. And even as a kid, I collected baseball cards. When nobody was collecting baseball cards among my friends, like my friends always were like, why do you have such a huge baseball card collection? It was always like the biggest collection in the neighborhood. And I was thrilled, like when I finally met another kid, like there was a meeting one time, I remember, in my bedroom, a bunch of like 8-year-old boys sitting there. It was like the biggest deal. Like I was swapping my entire collection for this one card that this kid had, because I saw the potential in this particular card.
At 8?
At about 8 years old, yeah. I just saw something in it, and I've always been interested in the research, and it wasn't that I was looking at value because eBay wasn't a thing, the internet wasn't a thing. I guess the only person I could sell it to was my dad.
What was the card?
That's private information.
Okay, gotcha.
But the idea being, at the time, it made sense for me to go all in on something. It doesn't always make sense at times to go all in on a particular thing, but it was because I liked it. And if you're going to get into investing, often people, I think, make this huge transition of, well, what's going to make me money rather than what I'm invested in? You had asked, and I said no, but I'll tell you what the card was. So it was a tobacco card from 1909. So it was a Piedmont cigarettes card. Now, for a kid who's 8 years old, I didn't know a whole lot, and you have to remember research was limited. First of all, I could barely read at 8 years old. We weren't reading much. I mean, what were our research materials? Really like some baseball magazines maybe, right? Beckett, I think, cards was out later in the 80s. So we didn't have a lot of research, but I was like, wow, that card's 100 years old, nearly. It was an 80-year-old card at the time,
caught your attention, yeah.
Right, like to me, that seems like it's going to be worth something. These cards are brand new.
Right.
But at the time, like refractors were coming out and these shiny cards that had interest. But I was like, is that really going to have value to it? Like it's just another card of a guy that's got a little shimmer to it. But that's a card that's 80 years old. That's history. So I was willing to dump a lot of my cards in this big trade I mean, this was back when forgeries weren't really a thing because we were kids.
Right.
It was his dad's card. So we came up with this trade. It was a big trade in the neighborhood, and I eventually bought the T209 card, and the rest is sort of history.
Interesting. So throughout college, did you still collect?
I've never stopped collecting.
Wow.
I collect almost everything that there is to collect. Cards, comics, fine art, guitars, whatever I can get my hands on at the time that I think is going to make sense for me. But if I have to like it. I don't just buy or invest in something. My wife and I came to this idea that, you're good at what you do. You seem to understand how to invest, and she's willing to trust my judgment on that to the point to where we're going to do this, right? So that's how it sort of came about, that combined, because we have one checking account, one savings account. That's it. She knows everything I'm doing. At the same time, it's this trust that we're making a good call on this. This is a big risk in many ways. But she trusts me because we've been together for the better part of a quarter century.
Wow.
So I think trust is a big factor in investing as a couple.
So does that extend to traditional investments, like the stock market, mutual funds, anything like that? Or are we just specifically speaking about the keen eye that you've developed over the years for what I'd consider to be alternative assets?
Oh, it extends to stocks. It definitely stocks, bonds, 401k, 529. When we were younger,
Yeah.
we were aggressive investors, right?
In the market.
Right.
Okay.
You know that box where you can check where it says aggressive or moderate or medium? I was like, let's go aggressive early on. We did pretty well. This was like when we were in our 30s, right? So we did pretty well. We were checking and then I was like, hey, the market's not looking so good. I don't want to say I predicted the 2008 market crash, but I watch the stock market every day. My wife knows that.
Because you pay attention to the minutia. Yes, you didn't predict the 2008 correction, but you basically saw the indicators, and I'm guessing that you guys dialed it back.
Yeah, we did. I actually got fired in 2008 because of I was actually working for a law firm, and they just went through in October of 2008 and laid off a third of the firm. And no warning or anything. I'd actually just gotten a raise 3 weeks earlier. But everybody in my department pretty much got walked out the door that day. But I learned from that day in 2008, and it's going to happen again soon because it always does, that you need to be prepared in the event of a disaster, financial disaster, that is. So the idea of constantly investing, like they tell you early on, well, invest 10% of your paycheck. I try to teach my daughter, no, make that 20%. Invest 20% of your wealth. Every paycheck you get, I don't care when you start working, if you invest 20% of your paycheck into a standard 529 or 401k program, you're going to have a considerable amount of money when it comes to retirement. The problem that we have in America is, yes, this stuff is shiny and it looks like something that a lot of people want to aspire to, but it takes time. You have to invest in lots of things. This did not happen overnight. I didn't acquire this, it took some time. The ability to build that extra capital to where you can say, all right, I'm going to go in with an ancillary investment, like a car or artwork or a guitar or whatever it might be. You can start small. But over time, if you bought one Rolex, right, this year.
I don't know if we consider that starting small, but.
Let's say you bought 1 ounce of gold.
Okay. How much is that?
An ounce of gold right now is about $1,995.
A lot easier to buy that than it is a Rolex right now.
Let's say you bought a kilo of silver instead. We'll make it easier. That's about maybe $800, $850 for a kilo of silver right now.
Okay.
That's 32 troy ounces of silver. A lot of people want to get involved in something. They want to start something besides just standard, like putting money aside. let's say silver. If you were to just buy a kilo of silver every 6 months, instead of blowing that money on something useless and storing that away, 25 years from now, you're going to have something as an ancillary investment, which may or may not have gained money, but it's something that you can start to look at and say, I'm hedging my bet against the market. Like, these are things that can go. It's another way, no pun intended with the hedge. The idea being, start to look at things that might be outside the box. So silver and gold, those are classic things that are physical. I like silver and gold. The only issue I have with silver is eventually it becomes literally too heavy to invest in.
Okay.
But there's an alternative. You can now, because there's a thing called the internet, you can buy your silver digitally. So you can store all your physical assets in a storing house, which is a great thing. Now you can buy your silver and store it online in a electronic vault and have it held somewhere else. Which is also great because if you had to ship that silver, let's say 20 years from now.
Yeah, that wouldn't be practical.
It wouldn't be practical because it would weigh so much, you know, having 100 pounds of silver online weighs nothing. But in your house, in order to ship it to a clearinghouse to sell, that would take a lot of money to ship. So there are some things that you can do that I couldn't do when I started that can build your ancillary investment portfolio.
So one of the things I found interesting in our talks and our discussions is that you don't really finance any of your investments, let's say. And what I mean by that is obviously liquid investments are just that, but these non-traditional investments, whether it's comics or art or cars, which to me are art, you don't finance these things. So this is a car that has, you know, for all intents and purposes, a 7-figure, you know, price tag, and you bought that flat out. Has it always been that way?
It has, because when I was taught by my father early on, who was very conservative, he said, don't buy anything you can't afford. Now, sounds an odd thing when we have a Senna sitting here. Everything is optional, even like, so you can, even the color of these gas struts here, like,
yeah,
those are incorporated to sort of bring the red accents of the brake calipers into the car as you're so you can opt to choose whatever color you want, but that's the, and then the red stitching, again, that was an option. Relatively small detail, but if you notice the nuances, it brings the subtle red into the car.
This is absurd. I mean, I for the first time, I'm somewhat speechless. This is absolutely ridiculous. My God, you've got a clear roof. Look at how these doors pull. I mean, let's just catch this from this angle. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. So, what's the base price on a Senna typically? What was the MSRP new?
So all the Sennas were about $960,000 to start.
Okay.
So, but none of them finished at that price.
Right.
So think about a car starting a race at $960,000. Most of them finished that race at roughly 1.1 to 1.9 million, depending on the spec it had. So, obviously, there's carbon fiber throughout. This is painted carbon fiber. A neat little Easter egg about this is where you charge the car.
Wow.
Unlike a lot of cars, so right here, this is where you would put it. These are the kinds of things that make the car not only
like
unique, but it's interesting because they realize that you have to keep these cars on a battery tender. And often you're wrangling with things and trying to get things in your garage, but McLaren designed the car so for relatively easy access, you can, when you're done everything, it's right here for you.
Just plug it right up.
And then you just slowly put this down and press gently, and there you go.
I just want you to know that piece felt like a half a pound in weight, and I'm sure that if it came off of the car, that's 20 grand. That's what it costs to replace, I'm sure.
It's about $8,000.
So there are some really good reasons to lease this car or buy it in over time. One is you could probably get a pretty good interest rate before this last 2 years. You could probably get a decent interest rate of maybe 4 or 5% on a car like this. You're not going to get 0% on a car like this. It's just not. But the problem I see with financing exotic cars over 7 or 10 years is interest. So yes, the outlay is huge for a car like this. As you said, a 7-figure outlay initially, but I'm not paying any interest on that money. So,
well, if you finance it, is the average person going to keep the car that long? Or are you going to keep the car that long? Or would you be financing it, theoretically keeping it for a couple of years and then selling it for more than you bought it for?
That's a very good question. So it depends on what you plan to do with it. But most exotic car owners, after a while, find that the addiction to the next thing is too gravitational to not get pulled into it. So the guy who buys his first Gallardo, that's going to be it for me. Well, then it's a 911 GT3 RS. Well, that's it for me. Well, then it's a Lamborghini SVJ or a Ferrari SF90 or a McLaren Senna. But wait, there's still more, right? There's a Huayra, there's a Bugatti, whatever it might be. There's something that wants to bring you in to it. And it's a natural progression. It really is, because the person who's into exotic cars is into it for many reasons. But if you're into it as an ancillary investment, because they do go up and down in value, to go all in on a car, at least you're locked into a price point, sort of like buying a stock.
Okay.
Instead of dollar cost averaging, which many people would say, well, that's maybe a smarter move, I have found, my personal experience anyway, has been, I like to lock myself in if I think that that locking point is a good one. Sometimes it's not. I've made big mistakes. I've made huge mistakes, but I've also made huge gains. And those huge gains have outweighed those huge mistakes by and large. You know, when I was in my 30s, a huge loss was 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah.
Then it was 5,000 or 6,000. Then it might be 20,000. But when you start to realize, ooh, I bought a car for $50,000 and I sold it for $150,000, I did pretty well. I got to learn to trust my gut on this. And that's sort of how my collection built itself. I started small, my first car being a Ferrari 308.
I was going to ask.
That was the first car, the real collector car that I did very well with. I just happened to buy a car that had extremely low mileage. It would become an FCA winning car. It's passed on. I know that since I sold it, and 308s had not broken $100,000 way back when it was the first 308 to my knowledge that ever broke 6 figures. It was sold this was not on the internet. This was word of mouth.
Okay.
I've had people call me, wanting to get in on this car. This is a 308, mind you. At $250,000, there's 1,600 miles on this car. It's out there somewhere. A 1,600-mile, fully classic-ade Ferrari, meaning that Ferrari has said this car is all original, or that it's been replaced with parts that are all original. It's in basically pristine shape. A 1,600-mile 308. So just because a car books for, say, $50,000 or $60,000 on some online site, it doesn't mean that special cars that have a special meaning to somebody are not going to sell for extraordinarily more money. And that's sort of where my game lies, is in finding certain cars that don't fit the typical, even though they might fit a typical car, there's certain things about them that make them unique, and that's what I find worthy of investing.
How many cars have you owned?
42.
Wow. Okay. Are there any vehicles that you own now or that you plan to own in the future that you think will be absolute keepers, or, that would be a lifelong vehicle that passes down, to the next generation? Or are you detached at this point from that. And I find, like, you know, when you talk to car salespeople who've been in the game a long time, they're detached from the vehicles. They don't have the same level of enthusiasm as the person buying the car. So they can part with a car like it's nothing. Whereas, you know, me, I'm like, if I own this, I'm like, man, this would be hard to get rid of. I would have trouble parting with that.
Another excellent question. There is some emotional attachment. This one in particular, because it is a Senna.
Okay.
And because I aspired to get the ultimate track-focused McLaren car. I mean, by their words, this is their most premier track-focused car they ever produced. Those are their words. Better than the F1, better than the P1. That's saying something. An F1 is $20 to $30 million. Its sticker price was $600,000.
Huh.
The P1, its sticker price was about $1 million. Now you can't get into those cars unless they're $2 million. So this is $1 million car, but we're starting to see that not only is it an exceptional car, named after a phenomenal race car driver, but the heritage of McLaren is in racing. All the other cars they make, fantastic. For me, this is the ultimate McLaren. This is, again, me. That's my opinion. This is the ultimate McLaren ever produced, which is saying something.
So do you keep it forever?